The most dangerous thing you can do in a world built to extract from you is not to fight back. It's not to win. It's not even to escape. It's to become boring. Not boring as in empty or lifeless. Boring as in unreadable. Boring as in unresponsive. Boring as in someone whose inner world no longer lights up when the system pulls its usual levers. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Power today doesn't come from status, wealth, or even intelligence. It comes from predictability. If your reactions are easy to model, you can be guided. If your attention is easy to capture, you can be sold. If your emotions spike on command, you can be steered. And most people mistake stimulation for freedom. Let's be clear about what this is not. This is not about giving up on life. This is not about rejecting ambition, comfort, or meaning. This is not romanticizing laziness or withdrawal. This is about recognizing that the modern system doesn't punish passivity, it feeds on participation. It doesn't need you obedient, it needs you engaged. Every notification you feel compelled to check, every opinion you feel urged to express, every outrage you can't ignore, every opportunity you feel anxious to chase. These are not neutral experiences, they are inputs, and someone else profits from every one of them. The system doesn't collapse when you disagree with it. It collapses when you stop reacting altogether. That's why boredom is dangerous. Not because it's empty, but because it's uncontrollable. A person who doesn't need constant stimulation can't be rushed. A person who doesn't crave validation can't be manipulated. A person who doesn't panic at silence can't be herded. And that terrifies any system that survives by keeping your nervous system permanently lit up. But here's the part most people miss. If you try to simplify your life without understanding how this works, it backfires. Simplicity feels like deprivation. Boredom feels like punishment. Silence feels unbearable. People try to opt out and fail, then conclude the system was right all along. It wasn't. There's a specific psychological shift that turns boredom from suffering into strength. A mechanism that transforms quiet into leverage. Without it, opting out makes you weaker. With it, you become untouchable. We'll get there. But first, you need to see the trap clearly. Because until you understand how deeply your reactions are being farmed, you'll keep calling exhaustion a personal flaw, when in reality, it's the price of participation, and the system is charging you every day. Let's ask the question most people avoid, because the answer is unsettling. Why are you tired? Not physically. Assume you slept. Assume you ate. Assume nothing is medically wrong. Why are you already drained before the day has properly begun? Why does the idea of another week sometimes feel heavy instead of neutral? Why does rest no longer restore you the way it used to? Why does free time often feel strangely unsatisfying? Most people turn the blame inward. They assume a character flaw. Lack of discipline. Weak focus. Poor motivation. Not enough purpose. But what if the exhaustion isn't a bug in your personality? What if it's the product? The modern economy doesn't primarily run on your labor anymore. It runs on your attention, your emotional responses, your sense of urgency, your willingness to react. Every alert, every breaking headline, every manufactured crisis, every endless feed is designed around a simple goal. Keep you mentally occupied just enough that you never regain clarity. You're told these tools exist for convenience, connection, productivity. But convenience that never turns off becomes obligation. Connection that never pauses becomes surveillance. Productivity that never ends becomes extraction. You don't feel exhausted because you're doing too much meaningful work. You feel exhausted because your nervous system is never allowed to stand down. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. The people who design these systems don't live inside them. The same executives who build platforms to maximize engagement send their children to tech-restricted schools. They cap screen time. They retreat to analog hobbies. They read paper books, slowly, in silence. They sell stimulation and buy calm. This isn't theory. They've admitted it publicly. They understand something most users are only beginning to feel. A constantly stimulated mind is a captured mind. When everything feels urgent, nothing can be evaluated clearly. When everything demands attention, nothing receives depth. When your emotions are constantly triggered, your agency quietly erodes. Stimulation feels like living, until it doesn't. At a certain point it becomes noise, then dependency, then fatigue. And the cruel part is this: the system rewards you for mistaking this exhaustion for importance. A full calendar looks impressive, a busy schedule looks valuable, a constant stream of input looks like relevance. But beneath all of it is a quieter truth. You are tired because you're being used, not in a dramatic, villainous way, in a slow, normalized, profitable way. And until you see that clearly, you'll keep trying to fix the exhaustion by working harder inside the very machine that's draining you. In 1845, a 27-year-old man made a decision that his neighbours interpreted as quiet failure. Henry David Thoreau was educated, capable, and positioned for a respectable life. Harvard graduate, connected to intellectual circles, son of a successful pencil manufacturer. He could have pursued status, income, and social approval without much resistance. Instead, he borrowed an axe, walked into the woods near Walden Pond, and built a cabin with his own hands. One room, one door, a small fireplace, a few books, no audience. To the people around him, this looked like retreat, a talented man opting out of progress, refusing marriage, career, ambition, a strange aesthetic choice at best, a waste of potential at worst. But Thoreau wasn't escaping society, he was testing it. He didn't go to the woods to hide from responsibility. He went to isolate variables. He wanted to know what remained when everything inessential was removed. No gossip, no social pressure, no artificial urgency, no expectations to perform productivity for others, just life, stripped down to its essentials. "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately," he wrote, "to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach." That sentence matters more than it appears to. This was not romanticism, it was methodology. Thoreau treated his own life as an experiment. What happens to the mind when stimulation drops? What happens to perception when time stops being fragmented? What happens to agency when nothing is constantly demanding reaction? His neighbours saw inactivity. He was conducting reconnaissance. He planted beans. He read slowly. He watched ants wage silent wars on a tree stump. He sat for hours doing nothing that could be measured or monetized. And in doing so, he uncovered something disturbing, that most of what people call living is simply motion without awareness, busyness without depth, participation without intention. Most men lead lives of quiet desperation, he later wrote. Notice the phrasing: not forced, not trapped, led, active voice. Society mistook his withdrawal for weakness because it didn't understand what he was withdrawing from. Thoreau wasn't rejecting work, he was rejecting unnecessary work. He wasn't abandoning ambition, he was redefining it. And when he emerged from those woods 2 years later, he didn't return with serenity or escapist wisdom. He returned with clarity, a clarity sharp enough to produce Walden, a clarity disciplined enough to later produce civil disobedience, ideas that would ripple through history far beyond that small cabin. This wasn't the story of a man disappearing, it was the story of someone becoming harder to control. To understand why opting out feels so difficult, you have to understand what's actually being stimulated inside your brain. When you receive a notification, any notification, something subtle but powerful happens. Your brain releases dopamine, not the chemical of pleasure, but the chemical of anticipation. This is important. Dopamine doesn't reward enjoyment, it rewards the possibility of reward. That's why the content itself often disappoints. The message is boring. The update is irrelevant. The scroll ends in nothing, yet you keep checking. Because your brain isn't chasing satisfaction, it's chasing uncertainty. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement. It's the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. A machine that paid out every time would be ignored. A machine that never paid out would be abandoned. But one that sometimes pays out becomes irresistible. Your phone is that machine. Every refresh might deliver validation. Every email might signal importance. Every message might change your standing in the world. Most don't. but occasionally one does, and that's enough to wire the habit deeper. Now widen the lens. Your job operates on the same loop: intermittent urgency, occasional praise, unpredictable consequences. News cycles do it too. Fear, relief, fear again. A constant oscillation that keeps your nervous system alert. Even relationships have been absorbed into the pattern. Delayed replies. Read receipts. Silence that feels loaded. Your entire environment has been structured around keeping your attention slightly off balance. The result isn't pleasure, it's dependency. When your brain adapts to constant stimulation, it loses the ability to generate motivation internally. You stop acting and start reacting. You wait to be prompted, and reactors are easy to manage. This is why being busy feels strangely empty. You're expending enormous mental energy, but not directing it. Your attention is fragmented into hundreds of micro-responses, none of them meaningful on their own, all of them draining. From the outside, it looks like productivity. From the inside, it feels like exhaustion. This is neurological captivity, not imposed with force, but with design. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. The exhaustion wasn't weakness, it was conditioning. And the reason Thoreau's experiment mattered wasn't because he liked quiet. It's because he unintentionally removed himself from this loop. No intermittent rewards, no manufactured urgency, no artificial stimulation, just long stretches of silence. And that silence did something radical. It gave his brain back to him. Most people misunderstand simplicity because they approach it backwards. They think subtraction is about aesthetics. Clean rooms, neutral colours, matching containers. That's decoration, not power. Real subtraction isn't about how your life looks. It's about how much leverage it gives you. There's an old philosophical idea that explains this better than any productivity book ever could. A bowl is useful not because of the clay, but because of the empty space inside it. A room functions because of what isn't filled. A wheel turns because of the space at its centre. Emptiness isn't absence, it's capacity. The modern world treats emptiness as failure. A free evening feels wasteful. A light calendar looks unimpressive. Silence feels awkward. So people fill everything, every gap, every pause, every quiet moment. Meetings stack on meetings. Notifications bleed into rest. Availability becomes a moral expectation, and society applauds it. A full calendar is mistaken for importance. Constant motion is mistaken for relevance. Exhaustion is mistaken for ambition. But here's the reality no one wants to admit. When everything matters, nothing does. Every obligation you accept costs more than time. It costs attention, and attention is finite. Psychologists have a name for this drain: decision fatigue. Every small choice you make, what to reply to, where to go, what to prioritize, who to appease, burns a little fuel. By midday, most people have already spent their best cognitive energy on things that won't matter in a year. And once that fuel is gone, what's left isn't freedom, it's compliance. You say yes because you're too tired to decide. You react because it's easier than choosing. You drift because intentionality requires energy you no longer have. This is why subtraction is dangerous to the system. When you remove commitments instead of adding tools, you regain agency. When you reduce inputs instead of optimizing outputs, clarity returns. When your life has space, you can finally think again. This is where boredom enters the picture. Not as punishment, as training. Boredom tolerance is a skill. And like any skill, it strengthens with use. At first, silence feels uncomfortable. Your mind reaches for stimulation the way an addict reaches for relief. But if you don't flinch, something shifts. The noise recedes. Thoughts slow down. Your attention stops scattering, and suddenly you're no longer desperate for something to happen. You can sit, you can wait, you can choose. That's the leverage. A person who can tolerate boredom cannot be rushed. A person who doesn't need constant input cannot be overwhelmed. A person with space in their life has room to act deliberately. Subtraction doesn't make you smaller. It makes you harder to control. There's a moment in Thoreau's story that most summaries mention briefly and then move past too quickly. It matters more than almost anything else. One day, while walking into town, Thoreau was stopped by a local tax collector. He owed several years of poll taxes. The amount was small, trivial even. But Thoreau refused to pay, not because he couldn't afford it, not because he'd forgotten, but because the money funded a government he believed was morally corrupt. It supported slavery. It waged wars he considered unjust. The tax collector, who actually liked Thoreau, tried to make it easy. He offered to pay it for him. Thoreau refused that too. So they arrested him. He spent a single night in jail, one night, over a tiny sum, over something most people would have paid without thinking. That night produced an essay. That essay became civil disobedience. That text later influenced Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and movements that reshaped history. This wasn't stubbornness, it was leverage. Thoreau could refuse because there was nothing meaningful they could take from him, no career to threaten, no lifestyle to maintain, no reputation to protect, no comforts that depended on compliance. His needs were small, and that made him dangerous. This is the part modern culture avoids discussing. Freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want. Freedom is the absence of leverage over you. If losing your job would destroy your life, you're not free. If social disapproval terrifies you, you're not free. If silence feels unbearable, you're not free. Every dependency is a handle. Every need is a pressure point. And the system understands this perfectly. That's why it encourages bigger lifestyles, fuller calendars, higher stakes, because the more you need, the easier you are to manage. Thoreau inverted that logic. By simplifying his life, he removed the system's grip. By lowering his needs, he raised his power. By refusing small compromises, he preserved the ability to refuse larger ones. This is what ungovernable actually means. Not loud rebellion, not public defiance, but quiet non-participation. When you don't need their rewards, their punishments stop working. And that's why personal life design is never just personal. Every individual who reduces their dependencies becomes harder to coerce. Every person who exits unnecessary games weakens the system that relies on universal participation. Refusal scales, and history is shaped not by the loudest participants, but by those who could afford to say no. We're taught to measure success in numbers: income, square footage, followers, output. But there's a quieter metric that never shows up on a resume: life. Every choice you make is an exchange, not just of money, but of hours, energy, attention, years you don't get back. Most people never calculate the real cost. Thoreau did. The cost of a thing, he wrote, is the amount of life which is required to be exchanged for it, not dollars. Life. Read that slowly. That house you're working relentlessly to afford, how many mornings does it cost? How much of your calm disappears to maintain it? That promotion you're chasing, what does it actually buy? More freedom or more obligation? More choice or more dependency? When you measure success this way, the scoreboard changes. A simpler life stops looking like a compromise. It starts looking like a strategic trade. Modern culture trains you to stay in focused mode constantly. Optimize, respond, execute. But there's another state your brain needs. Default mode. The state you enter when you're not reacting. When you're walking without headphones. When you stare out a window. When your mind drifts without direction. This is where integration happens. This is where meaning forms. This is where insights you can't schedule emerge. Default mode doesn't feel productive, and that's why it's been crowded out. But without it, life becomes a series of tasks completed without understanding why. Boredom isn't the enemy of meaning, it's the doorway. When stimulation drops, perception sharpens. When noise fades, depth returns. When urgency disappears, intention has space to surface. Thoreau didn't retreat from life. He stripped it down until it could finally be felt. Most people are busy avoiding boredom because boredom feels empty. But what they're actually avoiding is themselves. A life constantly filled leaves no room to ask the only question that matters. Is what I'm gaining worth what I'm spending? You don't need to reject the world to answer that. You just need enough silence to hear the response. And silence, in a world built on noise, is no longer weakness. It's a form of power.